Just a little bit about Infomedia. We're a publicly listed Australian company that develops products for the auto industry. Our main product is an electronic parts catalog where you enter like a VIN number per vehicle and it'll blow out nice 3D models, all the parts applicable to the vehicle. We do that for most of the major auto manufacturers in the world. Originally that was a CD-based and then eventually DVD-based thing, and we've started offering it as a service over the internet. We develop a number of other kind of somewhat related products for the auto industry, but that's the main product of the company. So the infrastructure, our software as a service offering is hosted by a managed provider in the US, so I don't really have much of a concern there around backing it up and maintaining it. That's a managed service that we get provided, but I am responsible for all of our back office and development infrastructure in Sydney, in Melbourne, and in Detroit. Our infrastructure runs on ESX. There's approximately 200 virtual machines between the 3 sites, consuming about 40 terabytes of SAN storage, and we see around a 10% rate of change. Now, that's actually based on the Veeam backup, so that compresses down to about 10 terabytes, and I see about 1 terabyte a week of change in that. So I'm sure that this is a pretty common story. Up to about a year to 2 years ago, we were all physical. Many of those physicals, I'm still in the process of decommissioning. They are like 8, 9-year-old servers that had, in some cases, horrifically uptimes of 800 days that just kind of hummed along, but weren't getting backed up, and we're kind of ticking time bombs. So we've been really trying to virtualize everything onto our great VMware infrastructure. The backing up of it was very haphazard. Many of the servers had physical tape drives attached. It was mostly backup exec in various versions, and then trying to trace what remote agents on the servers that didn't have tape drives attached reporting to what physical servers to be part of what backup job was an absolute nightmare. So we really wanted to get away from that. And I'm pretty convinced that only around a third of the infrastructure was ever really backed up. So a lot of things that really should have been backed up weren't getting backed up properly. So when I had started, the challenge we were presented with was we wanted to back up everything. We wanted to be able to recover entire servers rather than just data. We wanted to get all of our backups off-site, which was the one thing about the tapes that was good. And we wanted to get away from all these different backup servers and versions of things and what agent points where. We wanted like one kind of unified solution. So the solution that was that we went with was Veeam Backup 6. We purchased a rather inexpensive iSCSI SAN strictly to store the Veeam backups, and we purchased LTO5 tape drives. In the case of Sydney, it was a library. To allow us to go disk to disk to tape with these backups, just to at least be sure that we were getting them off-site. So we run reverse incremental with Veeam, which I'll describe a bit more in a minute, but it allows us to back up for each one of these jobs only one file to tape, which makes it nice and easy to get that onto the tapes the once a week that I have a requirement to do so. So what we found is we've got around 40 terabytes worth of for the virtual server infrastructure. That compresses and dedupes down to about 10 terabytes. And we back that up to around 8 LTO5 tapes, which takes 3 to 4 days once a week. One of the great advantages of this, and I didn't even realize this when we rolled it out, was I was getting questions rather often from developers saying, well, something must have changed on this development server. It was working fine last week. We don't understand. So what this has actually allowed us to do is we not only can restore entire virtual machines, we can restore a week-old version of that virtual machine with a different name, bring it up alongside it, and then I could say, here's what it looked like a week ago. You can run your comparison, and you can tell me what changed, which has actually been kind of an interesting discussion to have with some of the developers, and it's helped them find some problems that they probably wouldn't have found otherwise. And part of the great thing about Veeam is its simplicity. I mean, it's a very simple interface. It's almost idiot-proof, and it's proven quite reliable. My one concern with it really has been sometimes jobs take 18 hours, and sometimes they take 2.5 days. and trying to figure out exactly why is, I know there's lots of variables there. I mean, it could have been that there was quite a substantial amount of change in some of the servers. It could be that there's a lot of other I/O competing with the backups. So, I mean, they always run. The question is how long they're necessarily going to take to run. I've got some examples. Yeah, clicker can stop clicking here. Let's see what's happening. There we go. So this is an example of a job that went well. This is, we gave a separate ESX environment to our developers. They got 3 hosts, a less expensive piece of ISO SAN, and they pretty much have autonomy here. They can spin things up, tear it down, and it's been quite good for us in that it reduces a lot of the requests to the department for servers that aren't going to last very long and are only for developers to test with. So at present, it's just under 6 terabytes, and I committed to backing it up its entirety Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So I just pointed at that entire virtual center, and I don't even have to name the virtual machines to back up. If it's a virtual machine in that environment, it gets caught by this one job. And we, in this case, managed to get 6.2 terabytes down to 1.1 terabytes after the deduping compression, and it backed up 62 virtual machines in around 16 and a half hours, and it backs them all up into a single VBK file that I can back up to tape. I was actually quite astonished that you just, in order to test like how I would react this in a disaster, you import that VBK file into Veeam, you just point it at that one file, and all of a sudden you see all of your backups for all of your 62 virtual machines, and you can restore either the whole machines or the data right out of that. So it's coming from the tape backup world where I was used to spending a day cataloging and trying to get a sense of what was on my tapes. It was a bit of a revelation, one file, and bam, away you go. So I was talking about situations that were less good. This one is my weekly catch-all job. So what I did here was these are the servers that I hadn't committed to backing up, but I knew that someday I was going to get bitten by not backing them up. So of my 180 virtual machines in Sydney, around 71 weren't getting backed up. And so I created a job. The Veeam jobs I have for the rest of the production environment, I name the virtual machines that I want backed up. This one, I pointed at the whole virtual center, and then I exclude the other machines I'm already backing up. So this one, if a machine gets spun up and nobody notices, it'll get caught by this job once a week. So it's actually been a really good thing. There's been a couple instances where a virtual machine that I wasn't backing up officially, having that backup has been useful. But this is an example of the kind of thing I've been facing where this thing has been going for 90 hours here, whereas it's the same amount of data as that development environment I was talking about, I mean, roughly. So why does this one take 4 days and the other one take 16 hours? So it's one of the things that I'm actually looking forward to out of this experience. Is Veeam has told me that they will come in and have a look at what I'm doing, and I'm sure that there's ways that I can tweak things to try to get a better result out of backups like this one. Thankfully, this isn't one that I've really committed to, but I have noticed that, like, for example, I have a job called Daily Critical Servers that normally runs in about like 12, 14 hours, that in some instances has taken like 2 days. And thankfully, nobody's asked me for the backup that I missed, but I'm a little worried that someday, it's going to happen and I won't be able to provide like that one, change to a file. But yeah, I mean, there's so many different elements at play here that I'm sure that maybe there's something I'm missing, and we can get to the bottom of it. But so yeah, any questions as to what I'm doing?
What's the backup server that the Veeam console is running on?
So this is actually something I'm in the process of changing. At the moment, it's a virtual machine. One of the things that Veeam does is it has proxies. So I have one virtual machine that runs like the whole console, and then I've got a few proxies spread throughout some of the hosts that help to speed things up. The problem with that is that I have to then install a backup exec remote agent into it to back that up to tape. And I've noticed that my tape backup performance hasn't exactly been great. So one of the things I'm kind of curious to try is moving Veeam onto this new physical server that I just purchased for the tape backup, and seeing what kind of performance difference I'll see running that on a physical versus a virtual. One of the other things that I'm doing, which is a bit strange, is the Veeam backup server, since it's virtual, I wanted to map in 40 terabytes worth of storage, and you can't do that normally via VMDKs, where you have split it all up into 2 terabyte chunks. So I actually used the software iSCSI in Server 2008 to map to the LUNs that Veeam backs up to. So I'm curious to see, so I'm basically doing that inside a virtual machine, which I thought was a little bit strange. So maybe on a physical mapping that storage directly, I'll have a better experience as well. But
are you doing digital machines as well as your Veeam?
No. So Veeam doesn't do physical machines; it only does the virtuals. So the few physicals that I have left that I have a requirement to back up, I'm backing up with backup exec to the same tape job that I'm backing the Veeam stuff to. But there's not very many of them left. Believe it or not, I think there's only 3 or 4 physicals that I need to back up anymore. So we've done a pretty comprehensive job of virtualizing everything.
Okay, so once you go to your Veeam job, you stick those files onto another server, and then you use backup exec to take those files off the tape.
That's right. So I basically just have an entire iSCSI SAN that does nothing but hold Veeam backups. And like I said, I had a new version of the slide deck that showed just the folder where these backups are stored, but you'll see one big VBK file because I'm doing reverse incremental. Then you see smaller files, and it's the opposite of an incremental, where the big one is the most recent, and then each day you go back further, you need to restore another incremental. So it only really amounts to normally like 20 to 40 files, depending on the job. One big one and a bunch of little ones, and you just back the one big one up to tape once a week. So it's worked quite well.
How long does a restore from disk take to say one standard developer thing?
Every time I've done it, it's been like 30 minutes, 45 minutes. It hasn't been anything that I've balked at. But then again, most of these VMs aren't too large. So I haven't tried to restore my file server, which is 3 or 4 terabytes yet. I'm not sure how long that would take, but.
You mentioned it supports file restore. What best platforms does that work for?
I could probably pick that one up.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, with the file restores, we put indexing on for Windows servers. So the file server probably works best for Windows servers. So you can set. Yeah. We also do Linux servers as well. But with the indexing for Windows, we're able to inject the file straight back into exactly the location it came from.
So with Linux, you can only do whole VM restores. You can't do.
No, you can do file level restores, but we can't inject into the exact same place. Correct, Nelson?
Yeah, what you mean is you have to specify the location that you're going to copy the file back into. Whereas what he's saying is with Windows, we have a one-click restore that injects it back into the original location. Yeah, without having to specify it.
Right.
I have restored a file in Linux, like a configuration file, that just the other day, so I know it can do it. Just a simple file out of VM.
Do you use the raw disk?
So no, the Veeam backups are stored on an NTFS volume. So I split it. It was around 50 terabytes worth of storage, and I split it into 2. So I've got 2 25 terabyte NTFS volumes that it backs up to.
Great. Thank you very much, Jason. I'll probably just kick on with my